Welcome, everyone, to the Center for Geopolitics this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, whatever time zone you're coming in from. My name is Isabel McCrae. I am the development consultant for the Center of Geopolitics here at Cambridge University. And it's really great to have you here for our event this afternoon titled Small States, Russia and the West, with our speaker, Eduard Abrahamyan. Eduard Abrahamyan is a senior research fellow at the Institute for Security Analysis and a postgraduate teaching fellow at University College London. He previously served as a teaching fellow at the University of Leicester from 2021 to 2022, where he obtained his PhD in 2023. Dr. Abrahamyan previously served as an aide to the President of the Republic of Armenia on foreign affairs from 2019 to 2021. And most excitingly for us, he has just published his new book with Routledge titled Small States, Russia and the West, Polarity, Constellations, Heterogeneity in the Geopolitics of the Caucasus. So this afternoon, very excited to have this discussion with you, Dr. Abrahamyan, and I will hand it over to you to share your slides and tell us about your new book.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for your kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to extend my gratefulness for this exceptional opportunity to kind of talk about my book. With respect to the audience, I realize that many of you might have better plans for tonight, and you decided to share it with me, and so I greatly appreciate that. With this, I would like to share my slides. Excellent. So, my book explores the reason behind the contrasting strategic choices of the Caucasus post-Soviet republics, namely Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, which make their divergent behaviors which made the divergent behavior of these states truly a puzzling phenomenon in the geopolitics of the Caucasus, which in fact fueled my academic curiosity when I was just starting my PhD. And so this book is an outcome, is a result of my PhD thesis, which were supervised by bright professionals and professors, Robert Dover and Tara McCormack. The interesting point is that the traditional literature in international relations suggests that neighboring small states situated within the orbit of strategic interests of great power that aspires to establish its hegemonic sphere of influence are prone to behave similarly. In fact, the contemporary studies predominantly validate this assumption. For example, the recent analysis within the specific regional context examining Nordic small states or smaller Gulf states, the Balkan states or the Baltic small states indicate that neighboring states, neighboring small actors make compatible strategic choices to adapt the challenges in their geopolitical landscapes at times of the age of global uncertainty. While acknowledging the individual differences among this category of states, the given authors or studies underscores the like-minded external positioning and strategies they adopt to navigate the shifts sort of within an evolving environment epitomized by the emergence of manifold threats, the assertiveness of regional powers, or the strategic competition among great powers at times of non-Western, so-called non-Western multipolarity. The interesting point that these studies broadly conform to IR theory assumptions, suggesting behavioral compatibility among neighboring regional small states in reaction to the geopolitical shifts. Whereas, contrastingly, the regional geopolitics of the Caucasus diverges markedly from the other regional paradigms and traditional IR assumptions, as evidenced by the distinct strategic orientations of the three small states, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, which become particularly evident in light of Russia's return to hard power politics since 2008. So the strategic heterogeneity became even increased after the emergence of Russia, or resurgence as Russia as a system shaping power, as an order imposing power. Russia's reassertion of its historical regional preeminence was designed to defy, first of all, the geopolitics of the Euro-Atlantic integration, and challenge the West-centric post-Cold War liberal unipolar world order. Compared to other regions with neighboring small states, Russia's agenda-setting intentions and series of events driven by that intentions, in fact, imposed uneven pressure on the three Caucasus republics to adapt their foreign strategies to the new reality. So my book, in fact, refers to Russia's aspirations to dominate the region with its system-shaping ambitions as a important contextual background for the discussion. Russia's incursions in Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014, as well as their full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, are identified in my book as external strategic shocks for the three Caucasus states amidst the dramatic decline of US-led liberal world order. And of course, the escalating power context between Russia and the West. It is important to bear in mind that these strategic shocks imposed unexpected pressures, forcing the three Caucasus republics to adjust their external strategies, individually reshaping their perceptions of the environment. And so the given shocks also precipitated the geopolitical reordering in the Caucasus. In fact, compelling the intermediary states to position themselves with one or two opposing blocs, those committed to a Western liberal, human rights-based democratic order, and those vehemently opposing it. Additionally, I categorize the republics of the small states of the Caucasus as non-Western small states, which is not only because of the intention to emphasize their peculiar political cultures, regimes, their individualist perceptions, or the focus of, or my focus of their indigenous patterns of statecraft and agencies that in my book you can identify, I concentrate on heavily. But first and foremost, because of the intention to emphasize the lack of knowledge and the literature gap in small states literature, which still remains Eurocentric in terms of research and West-centric in terms of interpretations of the foreign policy choices. By the way, I'm not praising what Russia is doing or has done or conducting, and I'm not condemning what they did. I leave all of that kind of stuff to political commentators. So my job is to try to understand their actions, to set the right context, to understand the dynamics of the context in order to explain the phenomena of heterogeneous choices of the three small states adopted during all of that course. Well, driven by this, my book sets out three arguments. First is, unlike the regions where small states typically align with consistent foreign policy trajectories, the Caucasus, during the period of tentatively 2 past decades, stands as a contested arena, not only between two competing poles, but also between two conflicting orders: the Russia-backed non-Western Eurasian order and the US-led Euro-Atlantic liberal order. As you can see in my slide, these orders came with their distinct political, economic, and security-related integrative frameworks, civilizational markers, value sets, and normative systems. Furthering this argument by expanding the study of regional orders beyond the Eurocentric models, my book posits that Russia's assertive return to the international scene in 2004 heralded the birth of a non-Western Eurasianism, in the Caucasus. Defined by its adversarial nature, this order, in fact, promoted Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia to adopt varying stances in relation to the competing pole powers, as well as their conflicting civilizational models of development. Furthermore, while competitive power politics are evident at the level of the pole powers, they also persist at the level of the three small states, as demonstrated, for example, Russia-Georgia conflict or ongoing political military rivalry, which is still ongoing, in fact, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. In other words, the strategic shocks of 2004 and 2014 rendered the use of force in the region as a conceivable instrument for pursuing political ends and resolving interstate disputes, thereby like something that legitimizing its application politically, for example, in Armenia, Azerbaijan disputes. And in fact, setting a complementary precedent for Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So in fact, the use of military force, it was normalized within the Eurasian, non-Western Eurasian order. My second argument is that it is about the profound strategic non-like-mindedness that formed the geopolitical congruence between these three states. It reflected in their divergent perceptions of the shared environment, which are rooted in domestic political cultures, regimes, historical narratives also plays an important role here. Geocultural identities and values, for example, which in fact underpins which is underpinned, in fact, by their divergent perceptions of their geopolitical location. And here is obviously the contribution of my book to the IR, where I problematize and conceptualize the phenomena of geopolitical heterogeneity. And therefore the kind of dissimilar foreign strategies of the Caucasus states directly stem from their unique national contexts and individual interpretations of the strategic choices they encountered in 2008, in 2014, and 2022. And of course, along with the perceived conflicting regional orders promoted by the divergent or opposing pole powers, namely Russia and the institutional West or civilizational West. My third argument stands to challenge the traditional IR assumption that the international system is the main factor that determines small states' actions, and so it imposes the severe restrictions or constraints on small states so that they only can do is to be rule takers only. In fact, this is not the case because and also important thing that my third argument also challenges the assumption that the regional orders can be altered because of the great power poles politics. So in other words, the IR teaches us that the order formation and the order alteration is a prerogative, only the prerogative of pole powers. I argue here instead that the geopolitical dynamics, power configuration, and order structures in the Caucasus have been reshaped not solely due to Russia's resurgence and its growing friction with the Euro-Atlantic opponent, Yeah, but primarily due to the different foreign policy decisions and choices made by the leadership of Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan in response, which in fact expanded or limited their maneuverability. I would like to, talk about just a few words about the frameworks, theoretical and analytical frameworks of the book, which is, I think, the most important one, just to show how I proceeded the research and how I conducted it in methodological and theoretical, from the methodological and theoretical perspectives. So to contemporarily explain and understand the strategic adjustments of the Caucasus, my study adopts the Constellation Theory, which is an early offshoot of the IR neoclassical realist tradition, which bridges effectively the neorealist approaches and the constructivist school of thought. So it is system level and unit level kind of analytical scopes that it unites. And so the constellation theory is an important and relevant toolkit to proceed this kind of regional analysis, where we have three different small states with their individualistic foreign policies and opposing two and more pole players. Yeah, it can be major player, great power, or superpower, or middle power, or whatever. So the authors of the constellation theory, initially they conceptualized the notion of constellation as a small or non-pole states basic set of relationships to the strong sides in their silent environment, and serving as a primary explanatory variable. The concept of constellations elucidate the strategic positioning and the nature of the established relations between non-pole states and pole power presented in the region, which in fact aligns with the book's primary unit of analysis, which is the asymmetrical relationships. The promise of the theory is that it facilitates the link between the immediate environment of the small states under scrutiny and with its broader regional system structural conditions. It steers the investigation towards the unit level characteristics of the small states, including the perception of its political geography and geocultural belonging, shaped by its unique stance relative to the pole power, which in fact solidifies the state's external positioning that significantly impacts its foreign policy choices in response to the geopolitical shifts or strategic shocks or whatever. Another distinct feature of the constellation theory that I expanded and adapted to the multipolar era research beyond the Western system is that the theory is fundamentally kind of redefines the classical concept of polarity by proposing relational aspects of its analysis. Compared to traditional IR approaches that view polarity as a static and often system-wide phenomenon, typically analyzed from a top-down system structural perspective, in my research, I adopted an innovative bottom-up approach, which examines the diverse reflections of reality from the viewpoint of each Caucasus state, scrutinizing how polarity also is dissimilarly reflected in the unique salient environment of each state, and how it unevenly influences their evolving behavioral patterns. So in other words, the application of relational polarity allowed me to determine how the subsystemic shifts in international politics are interpreted from the unique perspectives of small states under the scrutiny, facilitating and an in-depth analysis of how these states' leaderships perceive and react to strategic shocks and pole rivalry in their environment. It's like a kind of a manifestation of multiple realities reflected in dissimilar diplomatic conduct made by Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan, which permits more detailed exploration of evolution of regional geopolitics interpreted from the unique perspectives of the given states. So not from the perspective of the great powers, but in fact from the perspective of the non-pole states, small states. Moreover, the kind of the relational approach to polarity facilitates the analysis of regional order, which was specifically the case in the context of my research, which was not merely through the lens of scrutinization or securitization or desecuritization, which is featured in the relevant literature in recent years. Instead, it offers an insights into non-materialist expressions, like non-materialist expression of order as forms of different polar manifestations across states within a specific region. And in fact, it also examined the structure of order from the perspective of these small states. The study in the theoretical term aligned with so-called pluralistic universalism promoted by global IR currently, which posits that there is no singular way to understand the reality. So there are multiple expressions and reflections to the reality. In this slide, you can see 2 out of 8 tables of the analysis that you can find in my, which I also conducted during the research. It clearly shows that the geopolitical positions of the Caucasus evolved in the context of their given choices. So the different aspects or different variables, like the adjacent tools of the analysis, like the factor of compatibility or non-compatibility between the non-pole state regime and the pole, made its specific inroads or impacts in decision-making of these states. And here we see different positions of Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan with respect to the evolving order confrontation and pole confrontation at the same time. So obviously, Armenia was indifferent towards the decline of the Euro-Atlantic order, whereas Georgia was quite supportive towards the Euro-Atlantic order. Armenia and Azerbaijan were supportive towards non-Western Eurasian order establishment, whereas Georgia was opposing that. And here we can see also Azerbaijan clearly opposing Euro-Atlantic order domination or preservation in the Caucasus. The geopolitical locations also makes important sense in this research. And so how, not only how the competing poles or rival poles perceive the regional, but also how these small states consider their location geopolitically, and also taking into account their geocultural or civilizational kinship. And here we can see Armenia and Azerbaijan clearly located in Eurasian geopolitical location, whereas Georgia always attributed its policy, its vision around its mission in the region, and its goal to integrate and to be part of the European geopolitics. And so they perceive themselves as part of the Euro-Atlantic geopolitical location. the rest is about the compatibility indicator, is how the non-pole states in the region are they compatible or non-compatible with the opposing poles. And here is also another table. And I will stop here, and we'll be happy to take the questions if you kind of have some. I'll just try to switch the slides off.
Thank you. Perfect. I think we're good.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
It's always hard to accommodate, the entire book inside of 20 minutes long presentation. So I managed to do as better as it is possible.
Yeah, that was a great overview, and I'm sure it must be a painful process to try to condense everything down, especially in that you're really looking at this type of IR theory, which many people may not be familiar with in our audience. And for the lay person, I'm actually quite curious, how did you come onto constellation theory, and really what led you to try to develop a new theoretical perspective looking at small states, looking at particularly the Caucasus region?
That's an important question you are raising, Isabella, because theory is the stepping stone for every academic research, which paves way for an effective or comprehensive study. And so there were a range of theories that I excluded during the process, because I had several challenges to overcome. First is that the puzzling phenomenon, as I mentioned, divergent strategic choices. Second, obviously, traditional IR schools yielded little in terms of explaining what drives them to behave so heterogeneously. Yeah? And so the constellation theory, designed initially in early 1990s, at the twilight of the fall of the Cold War, indicated for me an attractive theoretical framework, because it was applied to understand why Sweden and Finland reacted to the fluctuation of tensions between Soviet Union and the United States differently. And so this was like it in fact informed me to take and to considerably or fundamentally renovate the forgotten theory for its pertinent application to the ongoing multipolar and multi-diverse order structured international relations that we are witnessing now. And I believe this is one of the, it promises much in terms of explaining non-Western domains in terms of like on a regional level analysis, something that the current academic study lacks of, in fact, because we have traditionally system-level analysis approaches, like top-down perspectives. And then the scholars traditionally jump to the unit-level analysis, ignoring or neglecting the regional-level explanations. And this is one of the, I think, from my perspective, it worked well, and hope it can also be applicable for example, Africa or wider Eurasian studies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we discuss a lot at the Center for Geopolitics, both in the study of great powers, which is one of our backgrounds for our scholars here, but also in looking at more regional order domains, and frankly, how IR, international relations, hasn't given so much space to look at the agency that regional powers have, and especially now in the globalized / multipolar world that we live in, how the decisions made on a regional level might actually ripple out in larger ways in international relations with Europe, for example, with even farther east in Asia. And I find that really striking.
You've mentioned that rightly, so I would like to highlight another nuance here, that agencies are different in different parts of the world. And so I also, underscored that the important thing here is to understand, make sense of the indigenous patterns of statecraft and agencies, because they traditionally impact the viewpoint, the scope, the worldview of the states involved in some geopolitics. So it informs their decision making. This is also where, getting back to the concept of multi-dimensional reality. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm curious what you would say in the theoretical work that you've done now in this book, and of course your other studies and interests in this field. How would this theory be applied for someone who's working in politics or working in other sides of the practitioner work, perhaps in the Caucasus or the larger Eurasian region? What would you say to them in terms of the value of this these theories, essentially, that you put forth?
In order to foresight the geopolitical tendencies, let's say, it is crucial to look at the nature of asymmetrical relationships, because those are key. The nature of the relationship, symmetrical is also important, but the asymmetrical is the most important one to define or to understand the potential dynamics that we can expect for an additional 1 year or two. Because the way how the small states in the region shape their relationship or perceive their relationship with much stronger actors or players in the region makes crucial sense, detailed sense of to what direction the regional geopolitics can evolve. We obviously see, for example, 3+3 initiative, and this is something that we should think about if we are a politician or policymaker. Is this a dynamic that trends towards the more entrenchment of non-Western Eurasian order? Perhaps yes, because there is no evidence that we can say otherwise. Armenia, for example, Azerbaijan is a staunch non-Western, anti-Western actor here, positioning itself as an actor that prioritize the relationship with the West, but with a limited context, with the narrowed down agendas, and with the West, which is traditionally norms-based foreign policy maker. So Azerbaijan challenges that. And on the other hand, we see Georgia, which is stepping back, especially in the context of the Ukrainian war that is unfolding. And so this might lead towards Georgia's repositioning itself, hedging with the West on the one hand, and making steps towards ideological convergence with the Putin administrations in some aspects, for example, Ukraine. Yeah, so the reason why Ukrainian conflict evolved. Armenia here is trapped, obviously, because on one hand it has lost its capabilities to deter Azerbaijan, and we have a significantly underbalanced situation, significant asymmetry of power between Armenia and Azerbaijan, with Azerbaijan dominating geopolitically and kind of positioning or talking from the position of power, from a position of dictating the terms of so-called peace process, And on the other hand, so in the context or against the backdrop of the limited mobility that Armenia currently experiencing, there is an agenda of European integration, which predominantly can be perceived as an agenda for domestic use, domestic politics use. So it's very complex, but again, the asymmetric relationships makes clear, at least in-depth sense as well, in understanding the general dynamics within the region and outside.
Absolutely. The complexity is definitely something I'm familiar with working in the South Caucasus. It's always part of the context. So we had talked earlier about this shift in regional order in the Caucasus since 2008, and that was when the Russians went into Georgia, and of course is quite a pivotal shock, as you were saying. And I was wondering if you could talk more about that, the shift that happened from 2008 and how you've tracked that.
The key imperative of the Kremlin was to thwart or to undermine at least the unipolar tendency of Euro-Atlantic integration. And we can clearly identify that all three states had something in common before 2008. And thus, this is fantastic in the sense that even though we had very conflicting relationship between Armenia and Azerbaijan, with Georgia lost its territories, all three shared the same foreign policy priority, namely Euro-Atlantic integration and becoming closer to Europe, becoming part of the European geopolitics, because many of them tended to think that perhaps being closer to Europe will enable them, on the one hand, to enhance their domestic resilience and mitigate the profound sense of insecurity in the region. In fact, Russia's hard-handed stance and their intervention to Georgia in 2008 heralded the first attempts of Russia to shape their own regional order, which was contraposed. I mean, even if we look what kind of integrative institutions Russia initiated by 2014, we can clearly identify that the main agenda was to split the region, to make a geopolitical division between Euro-Atlantic world with its system of values, norms, worldviews, and non-Western Eurasian world with its specific norms, codes of conduct, rules of the game. And sadly, one of the rules of the game in the Eurasian regional order was the use of force, not as the last resort that we know after the Cold War, but as a tool conceivable to be applied in order to achieve this or that political agenda. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also one thing I would like to add here, the preservation of illiberal, non-Western, non-democratic or illiberal regimes are one of the examples of Eurasian non-Western order structure. I mean, the norm of that order structure. So as we know, Russia's security institutions like CSTO was declared itself or position itself as a structure that can legitimate intervention in order to preserve the ruling elites, governing elites against so-called color revolutions. So this is one of that examples as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we are getting close to a quarter to the end of our session, I would like to invite our audience, if you have questions for our speaker that you'd like us to discuss, please do put those in the Q&A. Yes, join us. So something that I've been thinking about lately, I've been doing some work on Central Asia, and of course, this is perhaps beyond the scope of our conversation here today, but what has been extremely striking as I've had conversations around economic development and connectivity in the Eurasian region is really how 2022 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has led to the strengthening of this Eurasian regional order and identity, both through economic reasons, because the northern part of these trade channels has been blocked through sanctions, but also in this geocultural, as you're mentioning, and other types of political alignments that we see emerging right now, especially from the Central Asian Turkic regions. And so I'm curious if you could speak a bit about both how Ukraine and the war in Ukraine has impacted the Caucasus region and perhaps the larger Eurasian region as we started talking about as well.
Yeah, this is important to, I mean, that's a key question here at the moment to understand the main dynamics after the Ukrainian war, or in other words, how the Ukrainian war influenced the entire geopolitics in Eurasia. And obviously, we see here a full consolidation of non-West. Non-West, and especially in terms of the infrastructure, economy, and so on. Here we can clearly identify China's active involvement in the projects, in active cooperation with Iran, Russia, specifically, and the re-establishment of new life routes, yeah, or economic life routes, stretching from Central Asia to Caucasus, and on one route goes to Europe, which is also controlled, in fact, by increasingly controlled by non-Western actors. And on the other hand, we see horizontal and vertical infrastructure politics or geopolitics. Vertical is to supply the West, but at the same time keep upper hand on the infrastructure. And horizontal are mostly based on judging based on the ideas, on thoughts made by the Russian authorities or others, like North-South corridor, for example, or so-called Zangezur corridor connecting Russia and Turkey, and North-South corridor connecting Russia and Iran, are designed perhaps to, from my perspectives, to make the actors of non-Western world to be more flexible in terms of one-sided imposition of sanctions, whether it is economic or technological, geopolitical, whatever. So the war of sanctions here, I would reframe this in this way: the geopolitics of positive and negative sanctions, the region, what we can witness at the moment. So the positive and negative sanctions can to a certain extent correlate, or they can contrapose one another. And here, when the small states can play their role, actively enhancing their influencing capabilities, or choosing to be sidelined, self-isolated from this kind of dynamics.
Sure, yeah, there are examples of both. Can you say more? What do you mean about positive sanctions? Also, and we have some questions here, so maybe we'll jump to that right after.
Yeah, the positive sanction is simply about the material political support of one player or pole player towards other poles or towards non-pole actors. One of the positive sanctions, the example of positive sanctions in case of Caucasus, most recently, is the EUMA, European Mission to Armenia. This is an example of positive sanction projected from the West towards Armenia.
Okay.
There is many more.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So let's jump over to some of our questions here. One of them is, would you mind going into the role of historical narratives in non-like-mindedness? I think this might refer to one of your slides when you had the tables there.
Thank you very much for the question. So one of my theoretical arguments during the study, and also it is presented in the book as one of the tools of analysis, is that the historical past shapes certain factors for the decision making. In other words, the presence of the past, if it prevails or dominates, or if the small state, for example, had a traumatic past with one of the poles, its choices, the choices its leadership made is clearly affected by that traumatic past. So I call it the presence of the past in the book. So historical context plays crucial role. If we look at how Georgia, for example, perceived the Sovietization of its Soviet past, it clearly stands, it contrasts with what we see in case of Armenia, for example, and the same with Azerbaijan. For Georgia, Turkey is seen as, at least was seen in 1990s and 2000s, as the pillar of the Western order, so that making Georgia more reliant on relationship with Turkey as a Western actor, whereas for Armenia the factor of Turkey as a former pole with which Armenia had negative experiences, was something like limited the attraction to move towards the West. And of course, Turkey is an interesting example here because it obviously changes its camps, polar camps, from Western towards non-Western, and in fact, sometimes anti-Western, if we look at how it behaves in terms of limiting the Western influences in the Middle East, in the Black Sea, to a certain extent, of course. Yeah, hope I...
Great question. I found that a very interesting frame for my own thinking about this topic. And so we have another one, which I think is also super interesting and related. To what extent is the heterogeneity in the Caucasian states' alignment connected to the process through which they reemerged as independent states in the 1990s, i.e., at a time when the global order itself was being reshaped?
The moment they have regained their independence, they found themselves in relatively the same orbit. They have joined CIS. So at first glance, they have little heterogenetic exhibition of their foreign policy. But over the period when the unipolar Euro-Atlantic integration enhanced its role, for example, in the Black Sea, and moving towards the CIS borders, the heterogeneity emboldened in terms of the foreign policy choices of the Caucasus states. The historical, it is always important and it's beneficial to look at how the states, the political elites inside of the states perceive their imminent environment. It is not something that we can, like, from the position of great power, judge or assess. This is very different. The perspectives are different. The one-sided or uniformistic approach towards regional studies or towards security in regional contexts is not something that we can say it's pertinent now. In fact, we can see the conflict of different interpretations. So the different interpretations shape the geopolitics in the region. And so the heterogeneity is an offshot, is a result, is an outcome of the different interpretations of their imminent environment and their role inside of the environment.
Okay, great. So it looks like we are finished with questions. I have a question for you, though.
Please.
What are you researching next? What's your next project?
I have a plan for a new book, and it has little to do with the Caucasus at the moment, but it captures the relationship between Russia and the West.
Okay.
Because what we see now, the clear-cut Russia's strong position or vehement position towards the West or anything related to the West was not the case in was not the case in 1990s and 2000 and first years of new millennia. In fact, Russians have not always opposing or let's say criticizing the West for its eastwards expansion. To the contrary, they wanted themselves to see as part of the Western world. And this is an important point of departure that I'm planning to proceed in my new research.
That sounds very interesting. We look forward to seeing what you come out with next.
Me too.
And perhaps you'll need to take into consideration how the relationship with the new US administration might be shifting with Russia. So look forward to that.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else, Dr. Abrahamyan, that I haven't asked you? Any final words for our audience?
Not really. I think it would be beneficial for all of them if you deal with the Caucasus or non-Western regional orders. I hope my book will be an important guiding material for how to understand comprehensively the dynamics and tendencies. Because the approach to look at the geopolitics as a static phenomena is over. Now it is everything. I mean, all is in continuum. And this should be embraced for the researchers, and not only.
Absolutely. I very much agree as the representative of the Center for Geopolitics here at Cambridge University as well. And thank you so much for your talk today, for sharing your theories and your new work. It's been incredibly interesting. Thank you to our audience for joining us on a Friday afternoon, and to those who watch this later on. And please, again, do check out the rest of our work at Center for Geopolitics. We are on most of the social media platforms at CAM Geopolitics. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter, hear about all of our in-person and online events at our website, which is cfg.cam.ac.uk. I think that's right. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.